Hello, Mary. It's a privilege to speak with you, Rowan from Silver Tiger Media.
Rowan,
how are you?
Hi. I'm great. How are you?
Oh, look, after speaking to Effie, you're just a welcome breath of reason. You really are. 1987 at the Athenaeum in Melbourne, I had moved that same year to Melbourne, and there it was, Wogs Out of Work. Just brilliant. This is such a treat. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. It was the show that changed everything, certainly for us that were in it. The show was more famous than we were. We hadn't done any television at that point, and it became a massive addiction for so much of the population. It felt like they'd never seen anything that they could truly relate to, certainly not on Australian stages. It was massive. It just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. That show ran for 3 years. And at
Which
one
is incredible
point,
in
two
itself.
different companies. We had a regional company that, 3 other actors that would do all the regional areas, and then we would do the major cities. And I think we did 3 national tours in 3 years.
And who could forget, being in Melbourne at the time, nobody could forget those tremendous advertisements for Acropolis Now with Franco Cozzo himself. I mean, the whole thing had become so big by then.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it was all really built on just the sheer audaciousness of youth and passion. And I think, it was certainly not premeditated, but it was certainly there was a momentum that was happening, and we're just building on what we were getting back from the audience. And people like Franco Cozzo, who is a huge cult figure, was like, yeah, that's a great idea, I'll do that. And it sort of married a lot of different aspects of a life that was familiar to so many. So it became commercial simply because, Australia is such a multicultural country, and it struck a nerve. And people of all cultures came to see that show.
Now, you're probably the number one person to comment, given your background, your formal training at Monash Uni with a BA, and part of that study was in journalism, as I understand.
Yeah.
Do you think we would get away with the WOG reference now in the current social political climate?
Look, I think there's always a need to keep perforating political correctness. As much as I'm not pro offensiveness, but I'm also very pro free speech in the sense when it addresses things that are important. And we can't look. Australia's such a complicated but simple nation. People come in from the outside and they view us and they think, it's just such an easy, friendly place, and it is. But on the other side, there is a lot of racism. And there always has been, because there's so many different races, and people have to adjust to, making room for things that are unfamiliar to them. So shows like Wogs Out of Work were necessary because, we needed to express our positioning and our lives on a main stage that became commercial because, the population reflects a very large proportion of multicultural Australians. So we needed to reflect that, and comedy is always going to press buttons because best comedy is based on truth. And the more true you can be and the more daring you can be, the more impact the comedy can make. So what it did was it began a very big and important conversation, and I think there's always a place for that conversation to be had, because as much as we like to think we're sophisticated, we can very easily revert back to an ignorant place if things are not being spoken of regularly enough, and if we aren't addressing the difficult things.
Oh, so how beautifully put, particularly in the light of current events. But at the time we had D-Generation, Fast Forward, comedy company and yourselves who were shedding that light and gave us the ability to relax to the point where we could laugh at ourselves and just say, you know what, let's get on with it together.
Yeah. It was the most fruitful period for Australian comedy. Everywhere. There was the comedy festival was huge, but then everyone got television shows at the same time, and the ABC and Channel 10 and Channel 7 all had big successful shows, like you said, with the D-Gen and with Fast Forward and Comedy Company and us. And it was a world of talent that was available and, peaked in the comedy. And it all came out of Melbourne at that point. There was the big gig as well. people like Wendy Harmer and, incredible comedy that just seemed to, rise to the top of the Australian consciousness at the same time. And we sort of perforated all the drama, because until that point, apart from the occasional comedy, there was a lot of Sullivans and Flying Doctors and that sort of more, I suppose, like soapy/drama stuff. So there wasn't a lot of identity being attached to what we were creating. It was pretty sort of vanilla and middle of the road in terms of, those genres. But when comedy comes into it, it sort of forces a reaction from its audience, hopefully one of laughter and also, simultaneously recognition. So I think it was just, it was a very fruitful period for Australian talent to be seen. And, I miss those days, because I'm sure there's equal amount of talent out there now, but we're not seeing it in a place that's easy to access. Yeah, you can get online, but then you don't know who they are and you've got to try find them. But when you put the television on, you know that you have the ability to be seen by people who wouldn't necessarily discover you if you were not on free to air. So
of course, yeah.
I wish there was more of that. I was hoping that it would last forever that way, but it comes and goes.
Well, let's hope you're right, because the inherent return on investment, of course, is a multi-generational following like Effie has. I mean, she is just so desired and wanted to be seen in public. It's incredible to think of it.
Look, it's astounding to me. That was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
That a sitcom character, Effie was primarily based out of Wogs Out of Work, but then what made her public property was Acropolis Now, that a character out of a sitcom can continue, and this is definitely my best work. Virgin Bride is the show that I dreamt of for those 10 years that I was trying to become a mother, where I couldn't really commit to anything, and this was the show that I wanted to make, and I kept. I kept some sort of buoyant nature about my work by, imagining the show and hoping that there will be a chance for me to do this. So my best work has now happened 30 years after I first started, and I didn't think I could match some of that early stuff, because it wasn't just the quality of the work, but it was also the impact of the work and the fact that it had not been seen very much. That style of work hadn't been seen very much. So it's very hard to live up to that, because that sort of stuff becomes myth.
Of course, yeah.
And that's fantastic, but it's hard to live up to, because people's imaginations, because when they first see something, they elevate it to a place of awe. And even though I'm sort of technically more able, and now I can reach out to anyone who I think can help me, do the best show I can do. And so I've brought on the best director I could find, the best collaborators to do the best work I can do. You wonder whether it can match the discovery of when you first got seen, but luckily it has, and the audience has been very, very verbal about this show, and the reviewers have been very generous. And so, I'm very excited to be doing such great work, so many decades later.
Absolutely. And we're so thankful you're doing it.
You just don't know whether you can actually pull it off, because in some ways I think the hardship that I went through for that decade was sort of really reignited the passion I have for comedy. And we know that those things are connected too. We know that we need to laugh, that there's an absolute need to laugh when going through difficulty, that we know it's therapeutic. We know that it can perforate the darkness. And certainly for me, it's always been that, and thankfully for my audience as well. Absolutely agreed. I'll cut this out of our audio piece, Mary, but I have to express, while we've got just a minute or two, my wife Teresa and I just want to express our feelings. We don't know a fraction of what you've been through, but for your loss of Stevie particularly, we lost our little Matthew a year earlier, and just want to say that our thoughts are with you. I'm so sad to hear that.
Oh, look, as you say, it's the comedy that really does help, but I think there's a certain camaraderie between people that have been through that, and I don't think anyone else really understands. No,
they don't dare to, and I understand that too. I think that everyone suffers immense losses in their lifetime. There is no avoiding that. And to add your imagination to somebody else's loss when you're probably grieving your own and hoping that you never, in those in that position yourself, to especially as a parent, to even dare to imagine that is a difficult thing. I understand that. Look, the great thing with the book that I wrote was that it articulated in great detail and in a very relatable way what that was like. And people, it had such a huge response, the book, that when they did the 5-page extract in the Good Weekend, the letters to the editor were the most they'd ever received for any story. And people were writing saying, I never could understand what my sister or what my friend had gone through, but now I have a bit of an insight, and it's just allowed me to feel closer to them and to feel like I can communicate with them in a way that I couldn't before. And I didn't do that for everybody else. Or, I did it because it became a story I had to tell because it was bigger than I could have ever imagined for myself. And I did it as a tribute to Stevie's memory. I didn't want all of that to not be something that existed outside of my own memory of her. I wanted to elevate her somehow, and also to free myself. And I realised when I pressed send on the manuscript the very last time I sent it off to the publishers that I'd written something that was bigger than my own story. But I do that every now and again. I'll be working on something and I'll go, okay, it's actually beyond what I set out to do. It's actually elevated itself to something greater than me. It becomes a universal story. And there are 6 stillborns every single day in this country. And I've met so many parents that have lost children and that have gone on to follow in my footsteps in order to have their families. And so it's a great source of pride for me.
Oh, absolutely. And we can't thank you enough for it. We'll bring our copy along on the 7th of May for Teresa's birthday in Melbourne and hope to say good day to you.
Brilliant. Well, definitely. I would love that.
Mary, I realise you're pressed for time and we cannot thank you enough and Frontier Touring enough. We'll see you all over Skippyland starting on Friday the 28th of April for the first of 2 shows at Perth Comedy Festival, then to Melbourne Comedy Theatre for a tour, Sydney's new International Convention Centre, which sounds really posh.
It is. It's business class. It is. It's gorgeous.
All the way.
Brilliant. And Darwin, I've never done a show in Darwin, so I'm taking it to Darwin, and I'm in Adelaide for the Cabaret Festival, which Adelaide people do killer festivals, and I'm really excited to be part of the Cabaret Festival. Look, this show is my love letter to, all the things that matter to me, and nothing matters to me more than a sense of community. I know the difference it's made when things have gotten tough for me and when things have been great for me. It's just the exclamation mark to everything, and sitting in an audience with 999 other people laughing is great for that audience, but it's really great for me too. So, I passionately promote this show because I know that experience that we can have in that theatre together is definitely worth the money, and it's worth the effort, and it's worth the commitment to me because it's pretty special what happens during this show, and that's why it's come back for another season because we can't have enough of that stuff out there. It makes all the difference in the world.
It does, agreed. I think they're unmissable shows, and we'll certainly be getting to as many as possible and encouraging as many as we can. Mary, I cannot thank you enough for your time today, and we can't wait to see you, Effie,
Rowan,
and Sylvia around Australia.
Thank you. Thank you for being so gorgeous and passionate about all of this equally with me, and I look forward to making you laugh for 2 hours and maybe even cry for maybe a minute or two. Let's see. Let's see if we can do that. All right, Rowan, all the best. Bye,
Thank you, Mary. Bye-bye. Bye.